Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Peya, Perek Zayin, Halacha Aleph, and Halacha Beis. We're going to be learning Daf Nun Tes. We left off on Daf Nun Tes, Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the top of the Amud, Ha Tivoin, as we learned in the Mishnah in Halacha Aleph, that Rabbi Yosi Omer Ein Shikha L'Zeisim. And we have a Machlekes Amoraim, Rab Shimon ben Yokim understands that Rabbi Yosi is only referring to a very specific time in Jewish history, in which in the Holy Land, because of the Churban Beitar, there was a very small amount of olive trees. Everyone was distinctive and special. And therefore, it fits into the rule that when you have a distinctive olive tree, as we learned yesterday, that even if the person temporarily forgot, they will remember that entire type of shikha is not included in the din of shikha, and it retains property of the balabas. However, Rabbi Yosi Bar Zavida the Amoira understands in the Tana Rabbi Yosi that he doesn't have any source for shikha by zaysim. Shikha is mentioned uvekutzrechem, and even though we have a Rabbi Akiva, as we learned yesterday, that understands from the 2 psukim that are juxtaposed in Parshas Kiseitze, in Perek Chav Beis Pasuk Chav, the Torah reads Kisach Boit Zaysim Loisefayir Acharecha. Now Loisefayir Acharecha means don't remove the beauty from behind you. That is in reference to Peya. Don't completely beat. Sachbait means beating the olive trees. That's the way they would harvest it. However, since in the next pasuk it says Kisivsar Karmacha Loisa Oilel Acharecha, and as Bahashgacha Pratis, we are learning this in Parshas Kedoshim Tavshin Pei Daled. The Torah in Parshas Kedoshim already speaks about the din of leaving the oileless, of leaving the underdeveloped clusters on the grapevine. So this is a repetition, and because of the repetition, even though the Torah says Loisa Oilel Acharecha, Rabbi Akiva understands Loisa Oilel Acharecha means shikha. Because if it's Acharecha, don't go back to get it. And then we have a Gezerah Shav Acharecha, which enlightens that even though the word Loisa Fa'ed indeed is about Peya, but Acharecha is in reference to shikha. So Rabbi Akiva, in other words, you need to have a limud, a Gezerah Shava, which will tell you that there is shikha by zaysim. Rabbi Yosi does not subscribe to that Gezerah Shava, and as we have a rule, Ein Adam Don Gezerah Shava Elam Kain, he learned it from his Rebbe, and therefore Rabbi Yosi Bar Zavida completely rejects the din of shikha by trees. Okay, now we're gonna close up that sugya up until the Mishnah. The new Mishnah, Halacha Beis, the new Mishnah, the second Mishnah in Perek Shvi, is going to give us more cases where we're going to see that we have exemptions of shikha by trees. And furthermore, we're going to have the big rule of at what point, when, according to the Tanakam of the Mishnah, that there is shikha by trees, not Rabbi Yosi. And even according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yokim, even according to Rabbi Yosi, right? What's that shikha that you already went on? How far on must you go for us to say, now you forgot it. Now loisashu, don't go back. What does going back mean? We already mentioned a few times the story how Rabbi Chia Hagadol, right, was said that going back means that even if you physically walked a couple of steps or a step beyond the tree, if you can, where you are, lean back and with your hand grab an olive, you didn't yet move on. We're going to have more nuances. We're going to, God willing, let's get into a very important Maharafulda that we'll have on top of Daf Samach that will really give a qualification that will almost change. It will enlighten everything we learned yesterday and everything we're learning today regarding from when is there shikha by trees. And we're going to always use the olive tree as the ground zero, because the Torah says, as we just quoted, that kisach boit zaysim or zayscha loisefayed acharecha. Let's go with the acharecha, meaning shikha. Daf Nun Tes, 2 lines from the top of the Amud. The Gemara is going to challenge Rabbi Akiva. Now it's a little bit difficult to understand the kasha, but we're going to read it in the Gemara. We're going to read the way that Rash Shadilio understands the question. Let's go. Li Rabbi Akiva. The source of shikha is acharecha. In other words, when something is behind you, whether it's the acharecha by the kisif tzoid karmacha, lois oil acharecha, whether it's the acharecha by the zaysim, lois fire acharecha, don't go back. So the Gemara is asking, hativa, and I have a kasha now. If the word acharecha is the word that is used, that the Torah uses, to tell you once something is behind you, which means you forgot it, don't go back. Hadei oimer shikha. When it comes to the general din of shikha, uvekutzechem es ketzir artzechem. Hadei loiksiv acharecha. You don't have the word acharecha. So what? I mean, the Torah says leisashav lekachta, but look inside the Rashidilya all the way on the top of the right column. Hativa and Hadei oimer. And the Gemara says that this kasha goes on the Tana Rabbi Akiva, other Rabbi Akiva part. That heicha mashma midchsiv acharecha shikha. How do you say that the word acharecha is the key word from where we learn that there is a din of shikha to hagabo oimer loisashuv hudchsiv? All the Torah writes that loisashuv lekachta v'shachachta loisashuv v'acharecha leiksiv v'heicha ksiv acharecha gabe shikha the ligmar zayis minei. It's very strange for you to say that in the main pasuk that speaks about shikha, the Torah does not de facto use the word acharecha, and yet you, Rabbi Akiva, you're using the word acharecha. I know the word acharecha is by kerem, but don't forget also that the literal in kerem is oileless. So it's a very strange gezerah shava. No, normally the way we'll learn. Normally a gezerah shava is that in one area in the Torah there is a clear din. And since the Torah uses a word in the clear din place, and in another place we compare and we learn one from the other. This is not the ground. This is not the ground zero. Actually, like we mentioned, the Torah says loisa oilo. In other words, then it's superfluous. But acharecha is meramis. So why are you applying it to shikha? Because of acharecha, you don't even have the word acharecha by the main source. So for that, the Gemara answers, the Kiven Sheksiv, since the Torah does say in the pasuk of Shikha by Oimed, Loisashuv lekachtoi, don't go back, don't turn back to take it, implies that you moved on. Turning back is something that you do for that which is acharecha. So Kimi Sheksiv acharecha. So therefore, yes, Shikha is always about that which is acharecha, and therefore we're not bothered by using the acharecha, even though it's by the loisa oil, but it's merames to the acharecha. That means shikha, and from there we learn to zeis. Okay, weiter. Rabbi Yoina boi, again, the word boi here means he marafulda ratza loima. He says, Hahan zayis nutoifa. This law that we just learned concerning this unique olive tree, it's dripping with oil. Right, and it is distinctive. Al date de Rabbi Yosei, this Rabbi Yosei is not referring to the Tana, but it's referring to the Amoyre Rabbi Yosei Bar Zevida, right? That, as we just learned, understands pshat in the Tana Rabbi Yosei, that he completely rejects the din of shikha by fruit. In other words, there is no din of shikha. Even if you began to harvest the olive tree, which will be one of the cases in the Mishnah that we'll have in a moment. Just like, my guys, remember, we already quoted this yesterday, but let's repeat it. When we learned yesterday in the Mishnah, Latanakama, that when you have a distinctive tree and you forget it, it's not shikhad, which means it belongs to the owner because you will remember, right? There won't be permanent forgetfulness. So we said, in contrast to the Mishnah that we'll learn now, halacha beis, one of the cases in the Mishnah, that even if you have a distinctive tree, if you begin to harvest it, and for whatever reason you stopped in the middle, there is a much higher chance that if, when you came back, you forgot that you were in the middle, you moved on to the next tree, you will not remember to go back to it. Because when you'll think about, I already went to that tree. So therefore it is included in shikha. It becomes shikha. So says the Rabbi Yoina, if we'll learn pshat in the Tana Rabbi Yossi that says ein shikha l'zeisim, that it's a definitive statement, then according to the Tana Rabbi Yossi, there is no difference whether you skipped an entire tree or, like we'll have in the next case, even when you began to harvest, it's gavaldik, there's no shikha. That means even though you forgot something when it comes to harvesting fruits, and you will not remember generally, when you do, or if you don't, it still belongs to you. Oh, very, very clear. Now we're starting, for those who are jumping in right now, we're on Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph middle letter Amid. Continues the Mishnah to speak, not according to Rabbi Yossi B'Shitas Rabbi Yossi, but the normal Shita that we have started the chapter, right? The Pedic is Kol Zayis. A distinctive tree is not included in the dinim of Shikha. Let's give another case, and that will be now for people who have a picture. Pictures will be helpful. For people that don't have a picture, I'll do my best to explain what we're talking about. Says the Mishnah, when you have an olive tree that it's standing, and al shenimtza oimed, we'll see really there are two gersois, either shenimtza or shenimtza oimed, and it's significant. But we'll get to that in the Gemara. Bein shalosh shurais shal shnei malbanin, if it's within 3 rows. Now, so if you can imagine 3 rows of trees, and let's say they're going right, left, you can just, that will be just the picture that we're seeing over here. In between the rows, you have this rectangular empty space that are separating the rows. No, we don't need for there to be rectangular spaces that also separate the roads from top bottom. We don't need that. But we're speaking about that there are 3 distinct rows, at least by them being separated in one direction. And ushachachai, you forgot, the Mishnah is referring to the center tree. So if you have 9 trees, the one that's in the center, the center of the middle row, that means that from all of the sides, it's surrounded by trees. You forgot that. Even if that tree is not a distinctive tree, at least one of the ways of understanding the Mishnah, simply from its position, that also will be an exceptional case. That ain't a shikha. I'll just give you a heads up. The Gemara is going to speak a lot about this case of the Mishnah. Just giving you one heads up, as we learned in the previous chapter, that if something is tamun, remember that whole topic, saf and tamun. If something is tamun, then in many cases, it's not subject to shikha. The middle tree was ki'ilu concealed because it's surrounded from all the sides. That will be one of the ways we'll understand the Mishnah, but a lot more when we get into the Gemara. Case number 2. Now, the Gabbai did mention this, and I stand corrected to whatever I said yesterday. I did not say the right thing. Just like we learned in the previous chapter, that when it comes to bundles, there is a certain size from which, if it's 2 sa'ah, we learned, there's a machlokes how to learn 2 sa'ah. We went with the 2 sa'ah that the kernels will weigh, it's 2 sa'ah kernels, which is around 90 pounds. The same as by a tree, that if you have a zayis, you have an olive tree, it's not unique, it's not special, it's an average tree, but it happens to be a tree that you're going to end up with 2 sa'ah. Now, I don't know if it's 2 sa'ah of olive oil, maybe it's 2 sa'ah fruit. Could be by olive oil. It has to be of olive oil because the ikar fruit is for the oil. So I don't know that detail. But the same rule that there is a certain quantity amount that since it's a 2 sa'ah tree, here also, even if you forgot it, and even if there's nothing distinctive, bite it, ain't a shikha. Now the Mishnah continues. Bamed Dvarim Amurim, says the Marafulda, Bamed Dvarim Amurim does not go on this mission. Bamed Dvarim Amurim is going back to Halacha Aleph, where the Mishnah just established the basic rule. The basic rule was given by the example of a Zayis Hanatoifa. Really, we learned in the Mishnah right away. It doesn't only have to be Zayis Hanatoifa, distinctive in its name, distinctive, many distinctions. But one of the example, the beginning was that the olives are so unique and special that when they are ripe, bishatoi, the oil already drips out by itself. Of course, you squeeze it to get more oil. So when we learned in the Mishnah that a Zayis Hanatoifa is not subject to the whole din of shikha, that on this, we just spoke it out. When you forgot the whole tree, as Rabbi Ilah explained, when you completely skip over a tree that's distinctive, you're going to remember quickly. Because you completely skipped it. When you're going to think back that I harvested, I skipped that special tree. No, I didn't. But if the harvester, the farmer, the owner, the poil, you need both, of course, we learned all of these dinim. If you began to harvest it, and for whatever reason you stopped, and when you came back to continue to harvest, then you moved on without finishing that tree, even if it's this distinctive tree, but you forgot, in other words, you forgot to complete the harvest of that tree. Yes, leishikha. Why? Because you won't remember. Because when you're going to think back, you're going to remember that you began. You're not going to remember that you stopped in the middle. Okay. And now, words in the Mishnah that, God willing, I know it's Rosh Chodesh and we have to finish early, but we're going to have a phenomenal, foundational clarification in the Marafulda on top of Daf Sama. But let's begin. Says the Mishnah, Kolzman sheyesh lo tachtov. When you say you forgot, what are we referring to? So says the Mishnah that let's speak about the case, not where you skipped over a tree, even though we're going to get back to that. Let's speak about this final case. You began to harvest a tree, and you moved on to the... You would beat it, and the olives will fall down.
Rabbi, you just froze for a little bit.
Okay.
Right.
So let me go. When you have an olive tree, I'm going to right away put up my other machine. When you have an olive tree, you're beating it, Kevin, and the olives are falling down. Can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. And you are going to be collecting the olives that are on the ground. Now, the way farmers are educated in harvesting is that when you look down and you see there's nothing left on the ground, right, and you moved on, that's called moving on. Meaning, if there is still some olives on the ground underneath the tree, and the farmer for sure is going to be looking down to see was tutzach.
Recording in progress.